It is an honor to speak to y'all this afternoon. I was told to take as much time as I wanted. I hope you don't hold too much against Mr. Thornsberry by the time I'm finished for giving me such license. So sit back, pretend you're at a graduate level lecture hour, and absorb. This body, by its very name, purports to be a constitutionalist organization. We're talking about the United States Constitution, of course, but that document we claim to revere was produced by a particular set of people with particular history and worldview. A worldview now that has gotten so distorted by the one trying to supplant it that it's become alien even to many who purport to uphold it. I've had a couple of months to ponder what I wanted to say today, really a lifetime. I decided finally not to reinvent the wheel, but to go back to the speech I gave to another body over 2 years ago. That itself was the product of much reflection and writing I've done over the last 15 years. That body was my local Sons of Confederate Veterans camp. The core of what I'm about to present comes from that speech, with some revisions. Some of you may have had the opportunity to read some of my commentary if you've been a member of the local Ron Paul Campaign for Liberty email list. If so, you know I am quick to point out that it was the South which led the effort and indeed finally won the fight to secede from the British Empire. And it was Virginia, the mother of the South, that produced in its final accommodations that United States Constitution, which became the organic law of those now independent former British colonies. The men who wore the gray in 1861 believed they were called upon to defend the spirit of 1776. The Northern victory and control won by crushing that defense has helped land us on our current shores. You may disagree with my interpretations. In making my feeble attempt to sort all these matters out, my aim may be off. For any of the shooters in the group, you know that zeroing in a weapon requires making sight adjustments. Indeed, following in that vein, the New Testament Greek word for sin is harmatia, missing the mark. Hitting a mark, however, requires having a target. For humans in a society, that means having a vision of that for which humans should be striving and how they should control that striving, individually and as a society. Today we are engaged in a contest that's been going on longer than before any of us, even the oldest of us, was born. That contest is with a worldview that wants to make itself that target, that vision of that for which humans ought to be striving, and wants to compel how you are allowed to aim toward that vision. It began to radically come to the American Republic after 1865. What follows is my attempt to identify the nature of that contest by putting in context one of the most important historical markers having to do with it, that American Civil War. The attempt by the South to preserve constitutional principles failed, and a reconstruction of the South followed, which was an effort expressly meant to finally smash any clinging to the Constitution as practiced by that old republic. Today we see that reconstruction now has come to the whole country, with the express purpose of finally smashing even the bastardized memory of any such old republic and to create now not just a national sovereign, but an international one. Are we going to see these matters clearly and act accordingly, despite over 150 plus years of deliberately generated deception, or not? As President Jefferson Davis said as the war of northern aggression loomed, quote, "If this action is once tolerated, where will it end? Where is constitutional liberty? What strength is there in bills of rights, in limitation of power? What new hope for mankind is to be found in written constitutions? What remedy which did not exist under kings or emperors? If the doctrines thus announced by the government of the United States are conceded, then look through either end of the political telescope, and one sees only an empire and the once famous Declaration of Independence trodden into dust as a glittering illusion, and the Compact of the Union denounced as a flaunting lie. I love the Union and the Constitution, but I would rather leave the Union with the Constitution than remain in the Union without it. Those who submit to such consequence without resistance are not worthy of the liberties and rights to which they were born, and deserve to be made slaves. Such must be the verdict of mankind." Close quote. And this: "So face with calm that heritage, and earn contempt before the age." That encouragement is from Alan Tate in a work called Brief Message, published in 1932. Alan Tate was a native of Clark County, Kentucky, and one of the 12 Southerners of Vanderbilt, who, along with others and a fellow Kentuckian named Robert Penn Warren, who altogether wrote a defense of the South around 1930, which was also a critique of the modern age titled "I'll Take My Stand." Today, unlike the audience which received "I'll Take My Stand," we don't even have our labels right. I'm sure you've heard the terms liberal, conservative, and talk of those on the left and the right, etc. But I ask you, do we really know what those terms mean in the political universe? This afternoon, as it were, I'm going to try and give you all a hook or two out of which to try and sort some definitions, specifically relating to defending the cause for which our ancestors fought. That task is going to be hard on this audience for a few reasons. First, it will be totally unfamiliar to many, if not most of you. And indeed, if I haven't rankled y'all on some point by the end, I won't have succeeded in this talk. Second, even with familiarity, it is a complex tale, requiring thought and contemplation. The Roman Juvenal said what helped keep the Roman Empire in power for so long was the provision of panis et circenses, free bread and circuses. And Lord knows, with all our own modern forms of such distractions, finding time and concentration for that contemplation is in short supply. Third, we Southerners are not predisposed to its contemplation, which is one of the reasons we are disadvantaged in this arena. Richard Weaver, of whom you will hear another mention later in a collection of essays called The Southern Essays, says this, quote, "Candor compels its sons to admit that the South, despite its contributions to the founding of the American Republic, has never done much thinking of the purely speculative kind. Its literature has been largely a political exchange and otherwise philosophically barren. Despite the great expansion of Southern universities, Southern departments of philosophy have been pitifully small." Close quote. So I ask for your indulgence. However weak a beginning toward grasping a sense of the terrain on which we're currently fighting for our ancestors' memory and honor I may make with this talk, it is a beginning that must be made if we have any hope of avoiding eventual defeat in this struggle. California Supreme Court Justice Janice Brown was nominated to the U.S. Court of Appeals by President Bush back in 2005. Brown, the African-American daughter of an Alabama sharecropper, has had this to say about the role of the U.S. Supreme Court. That court's protection of the government's expansion in the 1930s was the triumph of our own socialist revolution. And that same enlargement of Washington's power inoculated the federal Constitution with a kind of underground collectivist mentality. The Constitution itself was transmuted into a significantly different document. She's also evidently said the federal government is a leviathan that's crushing everything in its path. About the state of America's culture and therefore inevitably the foundation of its legal system, she has said that when the country moves away from the religious tradition of the founding, we change our whole conception of the most significant idea that America has to offer, which is this idea of human freedom and this notion of liberty.